We are at the end of the second quarter of 2022. Last time we sat down here, there was a number of really sort of interesting commentary that you provided, David. But the big sort of overall picture was there was a squeeze in the market occurring, so that was really accelerating appreciation and pricing. Then we had the low inventory was also fueling a lot of really difficult situations for buyers, making quick decisions, bidding wars, things like that. I think it's safe to say things have changed rather rapidly on that front. What has happened in the last couple of weeks?
Wow, a lot. Our market is shifting big time, and we were hearing about this and sensing it on a national basis, wondering when it was going to come to Santa Fe, and then all of a sudden, within a period of 2-3 weeks, bang, it was here with us. Yep. I mean, the substantial increase in interest rates, the fact that property values have probably increased in Santa Fe 60% in the last 2 years, boys, that put a lot of stress on things. So our market is rapidly shifting. What I look forward to is that it's kind of about time, right? I mean, the sellers have had all the leverage and all the negotiating power at the table the last 2 years. And I think for the first time in quite a long period of time, we're seeing a little bit of an opening and opportunity for buyers to have a little more leverage in that negotiating process.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's talk about that, right? So I have up on my screen right now the last 7 days in the MLS what's going on. And so we have 74 new listings. Now that's a big increase. Like
huge.
Before we were lucky to get 20 in a week. Now we're looking at 74 new listings. In that same time period, though, we've seen 48 price reductions, which is up quite a bit.
Big.
And then simultaneously to that, if it's not any more confusing, is we have 87 pendings. So we have a lot of properties that are still going under contract. So we brought along Gabrielle with us here. She oversees our transactions and our compliance. I'm curious from your perspective, what are you seeing on the transaction side?
I mean, it's been really interesting, actually. And like you said, we've been seeing this over the past 2-3 weeks or so. Maybe like a month, 2 months earlier, we were seeing a lot of what people call bidding wars. So a lot of people trying to get the same property. So they had to be really aggressive. What we've been seeing now are offers coming in that are actually below the list price. You know, we were having these insane prices above the list price.
Yeah, sometimes 100,000 over asking.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy there for a while, making it really challenging for buyers. But now we're actually seeing things kind of stabilize, if you will. So offers are coming in a little bit below list price or at list price. Not as many offers on the same property. How
about terminations? Are we seeing any where people are second guessing what they're doing?
I don't think they're necessarily second guessing. We were seeing a lot of terminations previously because in these bidding war type scenarios, buyers were doing anything and everything to try and get a hold of that property.
Sure.
Right? And so now, like you said, there's a little more leverage for the buyers and there's not that level of competition. So they're not suffering from that buyer's remorse necessarily. Now we still see terminations here or there based on, different things with the property. But it's definitely not as frequent as we were seeing in the market over the past year, 2 years. So,
one of the things you mentioned, Kyle, is the index on consumer confidence.
Yes.
And boy, that went in the toilet back in 2008, and I think we're experiencing another time where there is a huge drop in consumer confidence, and then we ask ourselves, how does that play into a real estate market?
Yeah, I mean, I always harken back to it because in retrospect, it was one of the leading indicators that we were heading into a recession, right? Now, I throw it out there with a bit of an asterisk, and the asterisk is we're getting all this conflicting data across the country, right? So the jobs report is looking good, incomes are looking good, stock market's down, right? Consumer confidence is down, inflation is still rising. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot at the moment, trying to figure out which direction we're headed. And I think that maybe is playing with why the aggressive nature of the buying and the real estate side has slowed down somewhat, is because people are waiting a little bit, trying to feel how things are going to settle out.
Yeah, what I remember is anytime we get into a period of uncertainty, like an election or like with a shakeup in consumer confidence, what I find is buyers and sellers both tend to take a pause, and they are less apt to make major financial decisions at that time. And I think we're starting to see buyers slow down their process of making an acquisition,
Yeah.
purchase.
Well, and just the fact that we've had such an increase in listings in itself gives people options, right?
Yeah.
So, buyers before were finding themselves scrambling to effectively convince themselves to make an offer.
Yeah.
And now they have some options. And so in some ways, I think there's some parity that has re-entered the conversation between sellers and buyers.
Right.
And so the expectations from the seller side need to be somewhat adjusted, and expectations as well on the buying side should be.
See, and that's the challenge that we're kind of seeing on our end, at least, is you have two different sets of expectations with the parties, right? So for a lot of sellers, it's still that hot market where they're going to get that, that really high price over asking. And buyers at this point are like, I don't have to pay that much. So the two in some cases aren't blending.
Right.
So those hopefully will get more into alignment, but two very different views on what the market's doing right now.
I mean, let's be honest, that's why they're a real estate broker, right?
Yeah.
Because you're trying to broker between two parties that may not be in agreement. So right now is a challenging time for everyone involved, because there's so much kind of imbalance coming into balance and people trying to find out their footing.
Right.
Yeah, I think it makes it incumbent on a good real estate broker to really analyze exactly what is going on in that specific marketplace and what has gone on in the last 2 to 3 weeks to compare with the prior 6 months. Because I think we're seeing this shift down. We're still waiting to see what is the evidence. What does it tell us about where the market is heading? Do you think prices are going to be going down?
So what I'm seeing here is I don't think prices are going down. I think if anything, we're hitting sort of a stasis with pricing. So we've reached, as you mentioned, we've seen so much appreciation in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Everyone knows it's unsustainable to a certain extent. You combine that with the drop in the stock market. So for folks who are leveraging that to make an offer or make a purchase, that has kind of slipped away to a certain degree. And then a 2-point increase in interest rates has reduced the buying power substantially for some folks. So, yeah, I think based on the pendings alone and the closings we're seeing at the moment, the market is not in decline. If anything, we're actually seeing more sales occur, which is, again, kind of wild, but there's more options, right?
That's right.
And I think it just speaks to the demand that we've had pent up for buying here in Santa Fe. There's so much demand that even despite these headwinds, we're still seeing well-priced properties move quickly.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Our year-to-date transactions are about 17% below where they were this time last year.
Yeah.
But the average price has shot up dramatically so that the total volume is about the same.
Right. Yeah. So collectively, the numbers are lower, but they're at a much higher price. And so, yeah, it's an interesting one to kind of read through and try to understand where things are heading. And if you look at the data strictly, like that we've provided here, days on market are still down. Right. They've continued to go down. But with this influx of listings that we're seeing, you can't help but think that next month, by the time, our data is always lagging about 30 to 45 days, which is, the average time a transaction takes to close, that by the time we look at this in August, that we're going to be looking at a much different scenario.
Right.
So you think in August, the days on market will be increasing. We're going to start to see prices level off and not go through such substantial increases as we have been. And I think we're going to see a real decline in how much over the asking price a buyer is willing to pay.
Yeah, that parity has arrived. So a couple other interesting tidbits, right? What we're also seeing, and I think this kind of speaks to what you were talking about, Gabs, is when we have this separation between what a seller might expect and what a buyer might expect. So I was looking at the difference between the average asking and the average sold, right? And what's fascinating about that, you always have a pretty substantial differential there, right? Because there's always properties that sit on the market and so forth. But for the past 6 months, that has actually grown quite a bit. So the difference between what a seller is asking for and what we were actually closing properties at kept on growing. That divide kept widening, which is just ripe for conflict and disappointment in some sense, right? And I would say in some ways the buyers have held their ground. It's been fairly steady. And then now we're starting to see, for the first time in 2 years, that drop on the seller's asking side.
Right.
So again, we're starting to come back to a certain level of balance that we've been missing for a while. And so in some ways that might sound discouraging to folks, but you've seen appreciation the last couple of years we've never seen before, and it's not going down. So in some ways it's like you're still getting the price, it's just you're not going to have a frenzy about it that you might have had a few months ago.
Right.
Well, what a welcome reprieve for buyers who are still in the market, because now they will have a lot of options.
Right.
And our market has been completely void of multiple options for a buyer to look at.
Yep.
Yeah.
So last time, David, you talked about risk assessment as kind of your closing commentary on it. So right now, looking ahead, knowing what we know that's shifted in just the last 2 weeks,
Yes.
right? I mean, it really has. Our numbers that we're presenting here aren't telling the full story, and that's why it's important to have these conversations. But if you're a seller, what are you thinking?
If I'm a seller, I'm thinking I need to evaluate just how important it is for me to make that sale in the next 60 to 90 days, or do I have the latitude to make that sale not for another 6 months? I would be concerned long term, because I think there are a lot of unknowns down the road. I think the market is still very good and very strong right now. I think it is steady. I think there is more balance in the market. So I assess the risk as very low from a seller's perspective to sell in the near future. I rate that risk as a bit higher going further down the road. We're going to get into a political scenario where there's a big divide in our country, and I think that does not play well in a real estate market.
Right.
Yeah, which is, we even saw a pause, just a reflection of the wildfires that we're having, right?
Yes.
We saw a pause this past quarter due to that, and then it kind of came back. So, these, in some ways we feel isolated here in Santa Fe. We're almost kind of this island in the Southwest, but at the same time, these greater forces always come back.
They always come back, but we're lucky because we tend to lag behind, so we get a little more of a little advance notice.
Right.
Yeah.
So Gabrielle, for you, again, seeing the back end of the transactions, if I'm a buyer, what are you thinking right now?
I mean, it's definitely nice to see the inventory starting to go up, because that's not been an option that buyers have had for a while now. Definitely weighing out all of the options. I think that buyers are still going to need to move quickly, because we're seeing the days on market are still fairly low compared to what we've seen historically. I think that it'll get, seeing those price reductions, that's an indicator that maybe listings are starting to sit a little bit longer, right? Which is good for them. But I still don't think that it's gonna, I still think they're gonna need to move quickly. So, my advice to buyers would be to work with a broker who really communicates with you, who really understands the market, and is available. And honestly, the same goes for sellers. Somebody who's honest about what's going on. I think that's the best ammo for an uncertain situation that we're in right now. Because
how do you react, Gabs, to the old adage in the real estate industry is like, it's always a good time to buy. Which kind of, I always scratch my head. Why is it always a good time to buy? I've never really understood that. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily share in that belief.
Good.
Because it really just depends on the person and what their needs are, which again is why it's so important to be with a broker who understands you and your needs.
Yes.
But, I think in the past it's been with these high interest rates and high prices, it might be very challenging for a buyer, especially maybe like a first-time home buyer, to get into a property. Maybe readjust your expectations as a buyer. I've had a few conversations with people that want that pie-in-the-sky dream house that they've always dreamed of. Maybe start considering more of a smaller starter home.
I remember a broker telling me that one of the pieces of advice that they offer a buyer, which they found very helpful, was essentially, look, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if you find a house that fits 80 to 85% of what you're after, you seriously need to consider buying that property.
Absolutely. It's highly unlikely that you'll get the full 100%. So,
well, let's also assume though there is a chance that things could decline, right? There's so many weird things occurring on a national and international level that we're in some uncharted territories here. So I think a component of that advice, or at least a consideration from especially a first-time home buyer, is that if I buy today, will I be happy here 5 years from now or 10 years from now if I need to stick out a change in market? Right. And I think these are the important questions people need to start asking themselves, right? You top out risk assessment. Well, the benefit I think to us is that there's been so many buyers and so much demand that Santa Fe in the long term is going to be a safe bet. But how long of a term for you individually is going to be a major consideration.
Right.
Yeah, I think my view on that would be if somebody's going to need a home for a year or two, they probably should not be buying. That would be my view. But if they need a place to be in for a 5-year period or longer, they should absolutely be in the market to buy.
That's good perspective on it, because we don't know which way this is going to head. And anyone who says they do, don't believe them. Let's see.
Anything else to cover?
I'm trying to think what else we need to cover here. I'm laughing because I threw my phone over there. I don't know how many of our brokers kept calling me during this whole thing. I was just like, God dang it. Let's think here.
So Kyle, what would be your advice to somebody who's saying, gosh, this real estate market seems to be so good, I think I want to get in the real estate business? What would you say to a friend
interesting
who's
question.
wanting to become a real estate broker in this kind of market?
I would say this. I would say that there's opportunities to work with existing or experienced brokers who need help because they have a lot on their plate these days. And what we were talking about earlier with buyers and sellers being kind of not at the same level, seeing eye to eye, those brokers are really the monkey in the middle, getting challenged quite a bit. So helping them out would be a great way to get some exposure. Would I recommend someone coming in right at this moment? I think I would be challenged to recommend that. I think the whole real estate market and the conditions at this point in time really does behoove someone with some experience and perspective. And if that person has done their own real estate transactions, they've been in the market a long time, then they might have some great perspective on it, and that's great. They can do that. But this would be an interesting and challenging point. I don't think it's impossible, but it's not one I would recommend right now.
Right.
Gabs, what do you think are the biggest challenges that brokers are having with this kind of market?
It is ever changing. Like we said, it changes every couple weeks or so. So it's hard to manage and also hard to communicate with people. This is the biggest purchase or sale they'll ever make in their life. And so there's emotions are high, and there might be some difficult information that you need to share with somebody. And I think that's the most challenging part for brokers right now is trying to get people to understand what the market is actually doing in this moment versus 2, 4, 6 weeks ago.
And on top of that, we have a brand new computer software program called Matrix that replaces Paragon. So we've got brokers scrambling around trying to make sure they understand how the system works and that they can get the right data out of it.
Yeah. That's absolutely
that's something we didn't touch on just for our local sort of knowledge is that our MLS switched software platforms.
Right.
And in doing so, some of this data that we typically rely on has been either lagging or missing, and we're filling in the gaps as we kind of roll along. So I do think in some ways for the past couple of weeks, brokers in particular have been flying a little blind.
Yes.
And so, God bless them who've managed to, try to provide insights, based on kind of anecdotal evidence, but we'll get back to more statistical evidence soon. And that actually, it's funny, I'm looking right now at the sales price to asking price percentage, right? So this indicates of over asking. So in last quarter, when we wrapped this up in March, we saw 100%. So pretty much if you were asking 800,000, you were getting 800,000. It has stayed at 100 or above 100 for the past quarter. So this last quarter, the average is 102%.
102% is the sales price compared to the list price.
Yep. So you're
Wow.
getting more. So I know this is what I'm saying is we're kind of counterintuitive right now because we're saying that's slowing down. The data we have currently isn't supporting that commentary. But I can almost guarantee a month or two from now, we're going to look back and say, okay, things have made some adjustments. So it's hard to see what's occurring last week versus what the data is showing a month ago, right? And so there's a lot of headwinds out there. We know this, like just globally and nationally. And those are going to continue to be a factor. And so it's just be smart, be up to date on the information, and communicate. Communication is really at the end of the day, the biggest thing.
Absolutely.
And we have all this incredible weather finally.
Yeah. Talk about
A lot to celebrate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The monsoons have returned and boy, everyone's having a good time with their roofers and their landscaping companies,
Yes.
I'm sure. But yeah, I think looking at, we sponsored a concert and we had a good crowd and then of course it got rained out. None of us here will ever complain about rain, so we're not complaining. But it's been good to see events coming back to Santa Fe. We the various like the folk art market is going on right now. It's great to see people back in town, and it's feeling lively again.
Yes.
Our traffic exists, and by traffic I mean a red light. But it's good to see people back in town, and I think it speaks to Santa Fe has weathered this storm pretty well. And that we continue to be a desirable place for people to visit and live.
Absolutely. That is not going to change.
No.
Right.
Good. Nice to get updated on the market.
Yeah, I have a feeling if things change any more rapidly, we might have to do an in-between quarter report and not wait 3 months because there is a very real chance that things will continue to change quickly.
Rapidly, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Good update. Thanks.